No? Okay. All right, first confession. I think the title of the talk was How Top Apps Use Marketing Automation. And hopefully I haven't misled you there. Where InMobi lives in the advertising world, we definitely live in the in-app world, so living inside the application, definitely down the funnel a long way. So it's a lot about retention, it's about getting a lot more out of your users. And so that's why I've sort of swapped it out for engagement rather than marketing, because I didn't want to actually make it about an advertising thing. So that's the story on that. The way we look at engagement is that there's three axes, and obviously the top of the tree is experience, that is, make your app great. And the two other aspects, whether it's user acquisition or user retention, they're really two really important legs of the stool. But if you don't get the experience thing right, then everything else sucks. So acquisition, retention, very important pieces. You've got to be able to figure out how to get people into the app. That's possibly the InMobi piece, and I'll talk about organic acquisition today. And then retention is about what do you do with people once they've actually got there? How can you actually monetize the people that you've got? And we'll talk about the efficiencies of that in a little bit. Mostly I'm going to talk use cases today. I can get technical if you want, but at the end of the day, it's really about actually understanding the use cases and then applying the code to that. So I thought what I'd do is to talk about 5 habits of highly effective engagement automation. And so what are people doing that actually does work? And we're going to start off with the first 2 things. So we're going to talk about deep link, personalized onboarding, and user get user referral incentives. Referrals are one of those funny things that from the web, it got kind of like a bit of a sketchy reputation. But if you think about it, referrals goes all the way back to Avon and Amway and things like that, Tupperware. And it's really about inviting users from a trusted recommendation perspective. And you probably can't see this, but actually, if you look at acquisition all the way down the process, whether it's cost per install, cross promotions, all different types of paid type things, down at about number 11 is in-app viral acquisition techniques. So organic techniques is way down, and it's just above social actually as an example. But the thing is that referrals actually have a really high value. So Nielsen talk about 84% conversion when you actually have referral-based recommendations, and that maps through to, in the app world, that's really about like you get 18% higher retention, and you get 16% profit uplift. But actually, that kind of like gets increased in value when you're working with Gen X, Gen Y type users in your app. So these numbers actually come from Harvard Business Review. And so it shows that really that retention, if I invite you to an app, you're going to be engaged in that app a lot more, and I'll talk about that in a practical sense. So the thing that's happened with mobile up until now is onboarding has been really crap. So if I invite Linda to an app that I've been using, it's a recipe app, I love this recipe, I send the recipe to her. So that's user A sends a great recipe to user B. Typically what happens is Linda clicks the link and she ends out at a website, which is nuts. Everything about actually getting this app out there is to actually get people to install the application. And so what happens is Linda clicks the link, she ends out at the App Store, and then she downloads, and then she gets this generic experience, or worse, she actually gets a registration page. And that's all kind of changed now. What happened was that people have been doing deep linking for a while, but Apple talked about it a lot. And from a slightly technical meets non-technical perspective, if you think about deep linking in the web, you've been really used to doing referral codes or understanding about deep linking, like deep linking into a product page. So Yelp, typically you could click on a link and you could actually be at the business for the Sentinel in San Francisco. Now, Yelp do the same thing in the app. They actually publish that you can actually send a link which actually goes to Yelp and then the page inside the app. So that's called deep linking. Second phase of that is deferred deep linking, which is that situation where Linda clicks the link that I send to her, and after she downloads the app, she actually gets to the business or to the Sentinel in that scenario. So a lot of apps are now starting to publish as part of a marketing or an engagement automation. There's this important part to do with deep linking and so on. And obviously the classic would be Facebook. You know, if you send them the profile /12345, which is your ID number, then you'll actually see that person's profile. So all that's happening now in mobile. People are starting to architect apps to support deep linking and so on. And the reason why that's actually really interesting is this kind of situation, that if you can actually invite a friend or talk to another friend and actually get them to click the link and they get a happy experience, such as they get to see the recipe, or they get to see the surfing video, or the football video that you sent them, then you're giving that user a great first-time user experience. In this particular example here, we've got this guy called Marius, and Marius is actually this node here, but actually he's actually created installations of lots of other users, or 10 other users in this particular case. And the moral of the story is that really, if you can actually get referral-driven growth in your engagement plan, then you can actually get a lot of acquisition, which is non-paid. Sorry, Mirza. But the idea is what you want to do is actually figure out the viral hockey stick before your competitor gets that stuff. So as a general rule, you can say viral growth always beats paid growth, or always trumps paid growth. Who are these apps? WhatsApp? WeChat? And of course, Slack. So these are all companies that have had phenomenal growth because chat apps always have that kind of like viral loop, and it's a double viral loop, and I won't go into that tonight, but a double viral loop is the way you get things happening. And so obviously they outstrip it. And it sort of looks a little bit like this. If you're an app and you're doing paid acquisition, and you're the blue line here, so you might shoot off with paid acquisition, and you've got to win initially in that particular case, but if your competitor cracks the viral hockey stick, what happens is they go past you, and actually what happens is your paid spending gets less efficient because they're stealing the target users from you in that situation. So effectively it's game over. If your competitor cracks the viral hockey stick, the way of actually doing referral-based growth, then you actually got a real problem yourself in that situation. So let's have a look at Airbnb as an example. I said we'll talk about top apps. So just first thing, I guess, who doesn't use the Uber app or Lyft? One. So you've probably all experienced the situation where Uber allows you to actually invite a friend with a coupon code, correct? So that coupon code, and what happens is, again, there's kind of like a shared incentive. You get 20 bucks off the next ride, and the invitee gets 20 bucks off their first ride. And that's really nice. And so Airbnb actually nicked this idea from Dropbox. So Dropbox did this great. By the way, at the end of the presentation, I've got a bit.ly link to a white paper that goes through all this sort of stuff if you're interested in it. So it goes through the history of the web stuff and so on. But here we've got a situation where you've been invited, your friend Jason gave you 25 bucks off the first trip and the best way to travel, blah, blah, blah. So there's the incentive. You click the link and you actually go straight into the actual onboarding process. So what did Airbnb do really great? They did have a manual coupon code. With this deep linking now, you actually don't need to do the coupon code stuff. With deferred deep linking, you can actually identify who the user is. And that's how Marius, that guy before in that node graph, we could see that he's connected. And I'll show you an example of that in a second. So they did the deep link referrals, and as a result, what they got was 300% increase per day in the months after they released that. So there's a lot of detail in the white paper about this, but effectively they got 300% increase every day for 30 days, and it still stayed very strong. But they also got 25% uplift in bookings. So that's quite a nice sort of situation about how engagement automation meets deep linking and referrals. These guys here, has anybody heard of Jamie Oliver? Okay, he's made it here. He's pretty popular in the UK. So he's involved with this app called UApp. And UApp's a really interesting startup company. What they've got is they've got phenomenally high engagement rates. And what they do is they have this thing to do with micro actions. Micro actions, you do something small, like you might do a 2-minute plank at 3:30 p.m. in the afternoon. Are we all big plankers here? 2-minute plank, 3:30 in the afternoon, and that's kind of like a habit that you try and build into your day that is a micro action. It doesn't take much. It's not like actually committing an hour and a half to go to the gym. But the thing about UApp is, and very high engagement, was it's actually a social network. It's got social connections. So what these guys did was they did this deep linking type stuff, so that if I invite Linda to the UApp and she installs UApp, what happens is upon installation, she actually auto-follows me and I auto-follow her. So actually what they do is a really cool way of actually gluing together the social network based around the bootstrapping of that relationship. And if you think about that viral graph that I showed you before, then that's actually the way things really work, that you actually now know as an app owner who's connected to who, and that's the way you should be thinking about how you can leverage that a little bit later on in the app. So an example about how you can actually try and use engagement automation to try and target people. And actually I'll step back and just say what does engagement automation mean? It means kind of segmenting your users and triggering things that might actually be useful outside a transactional type of thing. So if you think about, again, say Uber, for example, when you get a push notification to say the car's arriving or something like that, that's very transactional in a sense. This is what you, as in a marketing role or a product management role, might be trying to figure out how to crack growth. And growth is really about that organic acquisition, paid acquisition plus retention. Then what you can do is say, okay, well, I need to actually segment my users. So this particular chart here on the x-axis is how long people have been in the app, and on the y-axis it's actually how valuable is a user to me, or how engaged are they in the application. So each one of these bubbles represents a segment of users, and a small bubble means there's not many users, and a big bubble means there's loads of users, right? So what we've got a situation here is we've got the guys who are light users and the guys who are power users. Okay, so you're probably always going to see a ratio where there's less power users, like for example, Spotify. Spotify's power users were 3% of their user base. So you can also represent it like a pyramid. And so you can always think about your high value users as being at the top of the pyramid. They're very small, they might be 3%, but actually they're super valuable. If you can actually do something with these guys here, because they're already basically net promoters of your app, you can actually start to actually get more growth using them as one of your tools of marketing. So in a situation, what you can do is actually run a campaign to take your engaged users or your high value users to actually recruit other users into the application. And so you might use some plugins, and this is an example just from our product, where you can say, okay, I've got a user and he's generated less than 3 installs. If you think about that viral graph I showed you before, somebody who's sitting out there and they don't have any nodes hanging off them, there's no connections, and so they haven't actually done something. So what can you do? You can actually trigger an automatic campaign to incent them, tell them about the $20 off the next ride, or invite them to do something by the end of the month, all those kinds of things. And you can set up those kind of triggered type campaigns to just that segment of users, or just those little bubbles that I showed you there. So an example of that is basically used in a lot of applications, like UApp, for example. It's really a situation that's quite common. So people who are engaged are very likely to actually share the app with their friends, which is really different to an advertising type thing. So if you think about that, the fact that referral-based stuff is ranked down at 11th, but actually it's 84% valuable in terms of people trust it, then it's worth leveraging. So what you've got this situation, so I can drive a user-get-user referral program because they're actually already engaged in the product, and I can use the deep linking to kind of smooth and give a really good first-time user experience. So I can deep link and see that pair of shoes that Linda sent me, or I can see the recipe that was sent to me first time. So that's kind of like an acquisition aspect of that. So that's organic acquisitions. The second approach to it would be about retention. And so you went out there and you actually got this user and you worked hard, whether it was through paid acquisition or whether it was through organic. And the user's here now. So there's this thing called day 1, day 3, day 7 retention. And you'll hear people talk about daily active users, weekly active users, monthly active users, or whatever. So we'll look at 2 use cases in terms of using retention-based activities. The problem is that basically in the app world, across, I think it's like 100 billion downloads, 125 million devices, this guy called Andrew Chen, does everybody know? A few people know Andrew Chen? So, big growth guru. So Andrew's now gone to work for Uber now, but before he was doing a lot of interesting blogging on this sort of topic, and so he was reporting just exactly how bad the churn situation was. So 77% of apps actually uses churn on day 3, which is a huge problem, massive leaky bucket. So I call them zombies. So this is like a day 7 type retention type capability. The pink group here are the zombies. So again, it's a pretty decent chunk of users in comparison to my really my highly active users, and my churning users. So effectively, these guys are the target group I want to do, and I want to lift them up. So actually, they're the segments. The system's automatically identifying those particular segments of users, and the way that happens. And I'm sorry, I can't pause this or explain it more. It's probably pretty crap, but we'll post it anyway. Basically, the users who installed 14 days ago, but they were last seen in the app 7 days ago, so they haven't been in for 7 days. Send them a push notification. Have you started your exam practice? Yes, this was an educational app, and deep link them into a page, into a questions list where they get 10 questions. Get started with 10 real world questions. Set it up. I want to run that from 1st of August. Run it through to December. So as a marketer, what I want to do is maybe run some A/B splits. I want to actually test this stuff for a while. I'm going to choose to run this during weekdays. I'm going to run it between 9 a.m. and looks like 3:15 p.m. in the afternoon. So this is a time that I think my users typically use the application. There are other ways. So there's like a little checkbox down the bottom that you can actually fire off a push notification when the user has typically used the application. So it's unique to every given user. So what's happening here is that I've selected an audience, which was the segmentation, so who hasn't opened the app in the last 7 days. What's the engagement method? Oh, what I want to do is actually send them a push notification and basically prompt them, have you done your exam questions yet? Send them into a list of questions. So really encourage them around the core activity of the thing. A lot of retail, we came from a retail type space, like we have Target as customer and so on. And quite often it might be to do with specials or new products in store, et cetera, or something that you might have favorited before. They're all valid ways of re-engaging a user based on something you've collected along the way. So collecting information about the user as they engage with in the early phases of the app is really important. Triggering at a particular time is really important as well too, which is why I just kind of mentioned. You can do it around, if you're a restaurant or something like that, you might be triggering around lunchtime to try and drive people into the restaurant. Same thing with engaged newbies to register. There's a phenomenal amount of users, apps that actually have loads of anonymous users, but they can't do anything more than the most generic things because, sure, you might be tagging the user's activity with your analytics product to try and learn a little bit about them, but ultimately the killer thing is to get them across the registration threshold. So what do apps do? Typically what they do is they actually throw the registration page up front. Yes? Who's throwing the registration page up front? Nobody. Yes, thank you. Thank you for your honesty. So you throw the registration page up front and then you actually discover that maybe my churn rate might be around the 77% on day 1 instead of day 3. So you've got to look at the actual funnel and say, okay, do I really want to give the user a happy first-time experience, as I talked about before, or do I want to grab their name? So you'll get lucky with some people will give their name or their email address or their Facebook ID, and that's cool. But you lose a lot of people along the way. So if you're an app that doesn't kind of like do that, you end out with a whole bunch of users which might be not registered. So I want to drive these unregistered users to a valuable registered user segment because then I can actually target them better on that. So in that particular situation, again, I'm sorry, it's probably not big enough. But really what I'm going to do is the user's installed. Oh, this is a really slow one, I'm sorry. So I might just, while it's kind of doing its thing, so the user's installed very recently, so between 10 and 30 minutes. Sorry, I need to do this, don't I? Between 10 and 30 minutes, we identify that the user hasn't registered, so these are just basically drag and drop things. We have a whole bunch of other different things, are they allowing you to send push notifications to them? When do they typically use the application? Are they an active user? Have they been doing a bunch of stuff this week? How many sessions in the last 7 days, et cetera, et cetera. So those are the kind of things you can do. Geofences, iBeacons, they're all data points in a user's journey, so it might be meaningful to you if you've got something that's got a location-based element to it. And so what you want to do is actually push them through to a registration page. So give them a reason to actually know why. And it's usually something like, what are the incentives around that? So what are the benefits of actually getting them to register? Deep link them into the page, tell them why, and so on. I'll skip the rest of this because we're... The last habit's about actually asking for ratings or feedback. Who kind of prompts the user after they've used the app 3 times to actually rate the app? So it's like a static coded thing? Yeah. So probably what's happened more is this kind of like, the apps that do this really well, they do it based on a happy event. So you've finished a level in a game, or you've finished a ride, and actually you'll notice this with Uber, for example. They don't ask you to rate when you're getting out of the car. They ask you the next time you actually open the app up, which is, it's a much easier way of doing it because you just kind of like knock the rating over before you actually do the next booking. Finish the level in a game, perhaps you might do a push notification to those people after that, say 15 minutes after, or it might be around dinner time, you might actually ask them to do that. You don't ask them for a rating. You ask them, would you like to give us 5 stars? Send them to the App Store. If they say yes, send them to the App Store. No worries, I've got a pretty good chance they're going to actually do the right thing. No, give them a one-click survey and a text option. Iterate your product. So we learnt this off people who were actually using existing sort of feedback type products to see that what they were doing was pushing people off to a little web page to enter stuff in. But it's something you can sort of think about as well too. This is, I tried to automate this, it was a little music application. So the user accepts it. So here you go, you get the 5-star and sure, bang. Through your mobile engagement automation, you can send them straight through to the App Store to rate. You can also send them through to get them to update if they haven't updated as well too. As I said, I did this in the car on the way back from Yosemite, so that's a bit dodgy. But so here the user rejects the prompt eventually. Okay, sorry. Yeah, so here's the example where this particular app actually throws up, well, you said no, you're not going to give us a 5-star review. Can you actually tell us what it was that you liked about the application? So usability, user interface, game dynamics was too hard, and just make that really simple prompts, stars or ratings, and then actually give them a text field to actually go crazy if they want to. So that's that. So there were 5 examples, kind of like low-hanging fruit that I think that anybody can really get started on. The more tricky things, as I mentioned, was you can, if you're in the retail space or the brand space or the venue space, then geofences, beacons, interesting things to play around with. Obviously geofences you can get started without mucking around with. Intersecting the beacons with CRM, so it's not about spamming, it's not about actually just triggering when somebody walks in the store. Integrate it with your loyalty system or your CRM. So we've got a lot of experience in that sort of thing where that's actually worked really well. And other classic sort of use cases we've seen people do stuff in is somebody's been in the cart, maybe on the web. They've abandoned the cart. So they haven't bought the pair of shoes or the pair of Marvy jeans or whatever. But when they're 500 metres away. This is kind of like where we started out, and we actually found we had retention rates of around monthly actives around 30%. So it's a pretty strong kind of valuable thing in the retail sector at least. Who prompts for push straight up front? Got nobody admitting anymore. Anyway, so now the best practice is to try and figure out how you can defer doing the push notifications, explain to the user why it's actually really good, and you'll push your acceptance rate for push, up into the 70% mark type area. So you'll find that demographically, you'll find that older people won't opt into push, and it can be down around the 30% opt-in rate, unless you can actually explain it to them logically. And you typically, again, do that after a happy experience. So it could be saving a preference or, putting a gate in front of actually saving a preference. So, for example, in real estate, we have some customers in real estate. So, the user can actually do lots of searches, but maybe if they want to save that search for later and be notified about there's a property nearby going up for sale. That's an example of that. Explaining it is really about actually getting that relationship going with the user, that you can be trusted, that you're not going to spam them to death with your push notifications. And I didn't talk much about tagging, but basically your engagement system needs to actually really leverage the data that you've got in your back-end system. So this particular example here is about questions correct from that educational app I had before. So if the user's got less than 10 questions correct, they're going to target that particular group of users in a specific way. So they're just a couple of bunch of different little things that are possible as well too. As I mentioned, yeah. So there's like a white paper. I realised actually what I did was I actually put the landing page up here. So it wasn't deliberate to try and capture your email, but if you email me anyway, then I'll just send you the white paper anyway on the referral stuff. I've got a mobile engagement podcast, so if any of you are actually doing apps and you've really been able to hockey stick at some stage, that's on the App Store, that podcast. So happy to interview you if you've got a great story. And that's about it. Any questions?
How easily does your app integrate with, like your service integrate with established apps? Like, is it a complicated process or?
Yes. So if you think about engagement automation, an app might go to market, and they might have something like Flurry, or they might have Google Analytics in the application, and then what they want to do is they want to do some push. So they might go out and they might plug in the Urban Airship API or something like that, and so then they'll actually start to code in that particular stuff. The marketing automation platforms like us, or engagement automation platforms like us, you drop in an SDK, and then you actually get all of these things get unlocked as part of the process. So typically it's like a 10 to 15 minute integration thing for an iOS guy, and 10 to 15 minutes for the Android guy as well too. But usually there's like a lot of going backwards and forwards with the marketing people as to what they're trying to achieve and stuff like that. Convincing the developer that this is better than actually coding up every use case. Like all of those use cases, one of the devs is going to say, look, I can code this up, it's just some SQL queries. And then you say, oh, really, can we run this in a split test, just for the next 2 weeks and see what happens? And all of a sudden it actually is competing with the product roadmap for, when you could be improving the product. So that's kind of like where these guys fit in, this sort of stuff fits in. It's usually 15 minutes, 30 minutes, then you start to do a lot of tagging in the application, like you might be doing in Mixpanel already or something like that. And then you've obviously got to release into the App Store. So yeah, there's a couple of friction points in that sort of process. So
it looks easy enough so a marketing person could go in and set some scenarios up.
I think it's like, from a lean startup perspective, what you want to do is you want to make it as easy for the marketer as it is to actually send a MailChimp message. So like, the reason why MailChimp or, Campaign Monitor or any of those things went from, sure, you could send emails before that in the old days, but really what you want to allow the marketer or the product manager to actually iterate very quickly. So I want to run 2 campaigns. I want to run that campaign that I showed you before. Maybe I run it in the morning and I run another one in the afternoon, or I try two different messages in terms of a split test. And you can iterate, get to the end of the week, measure the results, double down on what the champion was, how the champion was performing. Anyway, you guys know about Optimizely, so yeah. Does it make any sense? So we're way down from advertising acquisition and so on. How can we actually get more out of the users that were inside the application? So it's kind of marketing, but it's kind of engagement. I think there's a lot of stuff that pure play apps that are, they're developer-driven apps, and they've got 50, 100,000 users, and there's no marketing person in sight. You can still actually do engagement automation and really drive value into the app. So anyway, that's kind of the message. Yeah.
Is there a way to bring in transactional data in addition to engagement data? Like they've logged in this many times and they maybe purchased also this amount or something?
Yeah. So the question was, I remembered. The question was, can I actually bring transactional data? And the answer is like, in our system, for example, yes, we support string tags, numeric tags, date time tags, and you can basically tag from your back end or synchronize from your back end into the engagement system. You wouldn't do that for something you're not interested in, but if it's something like, the person's loyalty point score or something like that, so what's happened is the person might have actually transacted with a plastic card out at the cash register, goes through the back end and then comes back into the app. It gets synchronized back into the engagement platform because you might be targeting gold level users, or this person hasn't bought anything in the last month, so yeah, you do that sort of stuff. You kind of work backwards from there. What we've been doing is we've been doing that either from the synchronizing from the back end or from the app. Now we're getting to a point where we're releasing support for Mixpanel and some other analytics products where we automatically take that data in, synchronize that data in, because it just takes away one headache for you guys to do that. So you leverage the effort you already put into your existing analytics package. Yeah. Anything else? Thanks for coming in on Columbus Day.